Here's a question. Because we've already seen the Raiders trade Devontae Adams. Now, that wasn't just because the Raiders are done, but we know Adams wanted out. He's wanted out since they lost to the Panthers. We saw the Browns essentially admit this week that it's not in the cards for them this year. Shocker. They're 1-5, and they've got the ball and chain of the Deshaun Watson contract that's keeping them from trying to get a kickstart on offense. So they trade off Amari Cooper. I said this yesterday, Rodney, and I feel more strongly about it today. Alvin Kamara is in the last year of his contract with the Saints. He's an asset that they can use to get draft pick or two to reload for the future. If he's not going to be there next year under his current contract, now you can still work out a revised contract, but there's no way they're keeping him under his current contract next year. He's a guy you have to at least, and we know the phone rings. These GMs talk to each other all the time to see who's available and who's not. When the phone rings, you got to at least see what they're going to offer. They should consider trading him. They should consider trading him.
Mike, they should consider trading Alvin Kamara. They should consider trading Marshawn Lattimore. They have to dump the salary of some of these big guys. And I think Cam Jordan, I think we're going to see Cam Jordan on TV next year. I think he's going to walk away. There's no reason for him to go back on the football field. But, yeah, I think Alvin Kamara, I mean, you think about some of the teams that he can go to. There's a lot of teams that would love a guy like him. Think about the Kansas City Chiefs and what he can do in their offense. What's that?
I said, oh, God, just the thought of him with the Chiefs.
Yeah. I mean, and don't think that there's a lot of playoff contending teams that couldn't use a cornerback like a Marshawn Lattimore or even a Demario Davis. Some of these veteran players that are still good players that can play at a high level, you put them in a different situation, a different environment, it's just going to spark something. And I believe that Marshawn Lattimore or even Alvin Kamara, I love that pick by you because I think Alvin Kamara could walk right on the team right now and be a huge difference maker, in particular the Chiefs.
Well, and we think about the other contenders out there. This week, Brandon Beane was on Pat McAfee's show. The Bills GM said they're not done after adding Amari Cooper. Could they? Now, they have James Cook, and you know, it's not like it's a glaring need, but if somebody else might get him, maybe we should be in the mix. If the Chiefs are thinking about it, maybe we should try to get him. I always think of the Vikings because the rare season that Minnesota is actually pretty good. How can they get better?
That pick. I love it.
They have Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones already banged up. You need a couple of guys. You need somebody who can step in because you're putting a lot of eggs in one basket. We know how the running back position goes. The Cowboys, it might be a little too late for the Cowboys, Rodney. Go ahead.
Mike, let me just jump in. And a guy like Alvin, see, when you get a guy like Alvin Kamara, he can come in and he can play a similar role like Aaron Jones. You know, so when you have Aaron Jones and then you go from Aaron Jones to a 250-pound back, the offense changes. But if you're going from one body type to a very similar body type and style of play, now you can continue to run those plays in your offense and have success. I really like that. I like Alvin Kamara there to the Minnesota Vikings.
And I haven't had a chance to go through all 32 teams and say yes or no or maybe. One team that would be a little fascinating, I mentioned the Cowboys. How about the Commanders? The Commanders seem legit. They went into Baltimore and didn't get embarrassed. They can play with anyone. And Brian Robinson's been banged up. I know they have Austin Eckler, but if you could upgrade to an Alvin Kamara, I mean, we saw how good he was earlier this year. We saw what he did to the Dallas defense. The Cowboys really should be at the front of the line if they're serious about turning around this train wreck of a team they have. I just don't know that at this point Kamara is going to make a difference because he doesn't play defense. Maybe they should get Kamara and Lattimore and a few other guys if they really want to be a contender in Dallas.
No, if I'm Kamara, I don't want to have any part of the Dallas Cowboys. I want to go somewhere where it's a lot more structured and things a little bit more settled. I don't want any part of the Cowboys.
Hey, and one last guy to consider, one last team, one last destination. How about the Broncos? Now, you know, their offense is rounding into form, but Sean Payton's the guy that discovered Kamara, basically. He fell to round 3. Payton knew how good he was going to be. Going into the 2017 draft, Payton knew how good Patrick Mahomes was going to be, and he knew how good Alvin Kamara was going to be. And he almost got Mahomes. But for Andy Reid trading up to 10, when the Saints are sitting there at 11, and Drew Brees is in the draft room, and they had to go tell somebody, hey, Drew, you're here with some of your friends. We might take a quarterback here, just so you're aware of how this can go. And they would have, I believe, but for the trade by the Chiefs. It took Lattimore instead. But it was Mahomes and Kamara that Peyton was smitten with. And so if Kamara is available and the Broncos a playoff contender right now, you plug him right into that offense. It's not like it's going to be a massive adjustment for Kamara because he knows exactly what Sean Payton does, and he can make a more seamless transition there than he would in other places.
And it shows a lot of versatility with Kamara, the fact that we've named 3 teams that we can just, pick him and just plug him right in. And the Denver Broncos, I like that too, because it's an ideal situation because he goes back to a guy that knows him extremely well. He's very comfortable. And this is a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run in between the tackles, and he'll be running behind a better, healthier offensive line, a better defense, just a better overall situation. Alvin Kamara, he's done so much for that organization. They should be willing to let him walk if he demanded a trade. And if they didn't want to trade me, maybe if I'm Alvin Kamara, I say, you know what? I want to be on a team that's competitive. I want to be in the playoffs. That's how you make your name big. That's how you grow your legacy, is by playing in those playoff games, those meaningful games in January and February. And if you don't play in those games, it's like people forget about you. And even if you're a good player, people start to say, well, maybe he's getting a little older. You want to be relevant as a player, and you need to go somewhere where they can use you. And we talked about Minnesota. We talked about the Broncos. What is the other team that we talked about? Kansas
Chiefs.
City.
You were the first one to say the Chiefs, yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, all of that should be consideration, Mike.
And really, Kamara hasn't been regarded as a superstar since Drew Brees retired and then Peyton leaves, and the Saints haven't been relevant. And I'll save it for another day to delve deeply into the question of whether or not Dennis Allen is in danger to not be back next year. Let's just say they need to win some games down the stretch. He's got 1 year left on his contract. The Saints pride themselves on continuity. They don't make rash decisions. But at some point, you got to do something. At some point, it's not working. At some point, if the fans get too loud, or they become apathetic and they just don't care anymore and they stop showing up, or they're showing up with bags on their heads like they're already starting to do, that's when you got to think about, what do we do next? Where do we go from here?
We got to talk about it,
win.
Mike, we got to talk about it, because I don't think it's fair if we don't talk about it. You think about a young quarterback, and he's got a defensive-minded coach. The defense is one of the worst defenses in the league. They give up a lot of big plays. They're not very disciplined. So you look at the head coach and say, well, if we have a defensive-minded head coach, the defense should be a lot better. It's one of the worst defenses in the league. So what are you going to do? You're going to continue to stay with that defensive-minded coach, or are you going to go and look for another quarterback and get an offensive-minded coach to be able to work with that quarterback? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're seeing more of. We're not seeing all these defensive coordinators being hired. We're seeing more offensive-minded guys being hired to be connected with the quarterback. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, with 1 year left on his contract, no new extension in sight, that they can move on from Dennis Allen.
The key is they got to get Derek Carr back. You look at the earlier games this year. After those 2 wins, they lost by 3 against the Eagles. They lost by 2 to the Falcons. They were kind of toe-to-toe, or at least they were scratching back into it with the Chiefs on that Monday night before Carr got injured. It hasn't gone well since then. The schedule is not murderer's row the rest of the way for the Saints. There are winnable games if and when Carr is back, at the Chargers, at the Panthers. Yeah, the Falcons won't be easy, but that's a division rival that they can beat, and almost did when they went to Atlanta. The Browns before the bye week, down the stretch. Commanders, Packers, sure, at Buccaneers to finish the season, but they can still. They're not.
Look at
they're
week 14,
not
Mike. Look at week 14 to week 18. Look at that. Look what they got to deal with. Look at what they got to deal with. They got to deal with a Giants team that's a lot better on the defensive side of the ball. They got to deal with the Commanders, who's playing. Jaden Daniels playing terrific. Green Bay has been very balanced this year. The Raiders is a wild card, but the Buccaneers, you know, they're going to come and play. So, I mean, it's not an easy schedule, the back end of their schedule. So, yeah, they get a little break playing against the Chargers, maybe in the Panthers and the Browns, but that back half of that schedule at the end is deadly.
Now, look, there's 2 games left until the trade deadline. And back to Kamara, there was some friction in the offseason. He left mandatory minicamp. He wanted to take that contract that necessarily does require the Saints to tear it up after the season and move on and turn it into an extension. So there's been some heat there between the Saints and Kamara. It will be interesting to see. Now that he has witnessed Davante Adams blaze a path out of Las Vegas and Amari Cooper, escape the penitentiary that is the Cleveland Browns right now, will he be jostling the next couple of weeks to get out of New Orleans? If they win the next 2, trade deadline comes, you're 4-5, it's kind of hard to justify making that move. But these are things to watch because, number 1, they got to get Derek Carr back. And then number 2, they got to win some football games. And number 3, we've talked enough about that. I can't believe we milked 27 minutes out of that game last night. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.